Okay, so I'm gonna get people started. I'll start off by saying this, and actually I'll show people. This is a video of the Santa Maria del Fiore because it's one of these things you can't really describe it. It is in the effect, and so people can look at this while I'm talking. But I mean, essentially, right now, what I've come out of is an intense 2-month period with Mr. LaRouche, and I sort of got myself trapped because in response to a call for an educational program for the younger membership and the general membership of our organization, I basically said, I had made this statement about the work that our organization had done on Brunelleschi was just inadequate. And part of the reason it's inadequate is because anybody who does something this beautiful or this profound is a genius, must be deeply reflective and a very unique person. And you just don't get that from most of the stuff you read about Brunelleschi. He's just, you either get the one, how did he use the catenary to build the dome? And that's a question that you can't really answer that way. And then when the stuff you do read, you hear these stories and you get a sense that he was like a babbling idiot who just like stumbled over a chain and figured out how to build the most profound thing that shaped human civilization. And so I have been personally really provoked to come back to this question of Brunelleschi that I had worked on. And I think most people have heard the story, but when I studied in Italy for 2 years, I went to Florence and I went to this church, and I was drawn to go there all the time. I'd spend days there. I'd think about things, and even though I didn't know it at the time, it was like the first time I really considered God. That there's something bigger than me and my little world. And I didn't realize, Lynn talked about the dome, and I thought the dome was neat and everything like that. But then I went with my grandmother, who was getting dementia, back to Italy, and we were on this hill, and I realized, like, oh my God, that's the dome. Because I had never actually seen the dome from the outside. I didn't realize it was the same church, and it just made total sense to me that, if a building can change the whole way that I think about mankind, then there's something really special about this person. So in that context, what LaRouche talked about is, what he's been talking about recently is these 2 arcs. You have Brunelleschi, Cusa, and Kepler, and that they essentially were a part of a process that sparked the beginning of the fight in modern times of mankind versus the oligarchy, of Zeus versus Prometheus. And then later, you have Einstein, Planck, Vernadsky, etc. And so he made 2 very important points. One is that what they had done is they had defined for mankind why, he says Cusa from the standpoint of the maximum and Brunelleschi from the standpoint of the minimum, this higher idea of man in the universe, etc. And what he really puts forward, sorry, it was kind of a hectic journey here, but what he puts forward is that the killing of Joan of Arc, in conjunction with what these geniuses did, is what sparked the Renaissance. And the question is, well, why is it the killing of Joan of Arc? Why wasn't it the mass death? 2/3 of the population were killed. Why was it that? And I think it really gets to what we'll get into is this question of living in the future. That the essence of strategy, and Lynn says that Brunelleschi is a strategist, The essence of strategy is living in the future, and that's what her death did, because she reflected an idea of mankind that didn't yet exist. And by doing that, she gave people a sense of the future for mankind. But she also exposed in a knowable way how evil this empire was. That they would do this to a woman. You know, it's funny, Moya actually made the point when I was talking to her before the meeting. She's like, well, it's even crazier that they would do this to a woman, because they usually don't give a damn about what women think.
A teenage girl.
Yeah, a teenage girl, right. A teenage girl, they burn her alive. Because, why? Because she wanted a nation state. And so I think that's why this act that Lynn has pointed out, this is what it is. And what Brunelleschi and Cusa were a part of is they were living in this future, and they had a unique moment, sort of what we're in the middle of right now, where they could actually seize a certain power, but they couldn't do it with anything that had already happened, because everything that already happened was mass genocide, etc. And I mean, it's sort of the moment we're in right now. I mean, this Obama's Iraq war could be the assassination of Joan of Arc. I mean, think about 11 years ago when we were about to go to Iraq, and this is part of why I joined. You know, I was organizing these protests with hundreds of thousands of people in the street. People that you would never think come together. Like, soccer moms from, wealthy Republican soccer moms, crazy liberals who never shower. All of these people were together because they knew that it was wrong. They knew it had nothing to do with 9/11, and they didn't want to see these young children go, to the Middle East and kill people for no reason. And I think that now, as we're approaching this Iraq war, this same mentality, if we're in a position to actually be in the future and pull these people into the future, you can generate a very similar effect. So, hopefully people have been looking at this very beautiful church. And,
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Did Brunelleschi build all of this? Did he do the whole church?
Just the
I'm going to get to that. Yeah, that's a good question. And people should ask questions. Oops. So before I get to the actual church, and he didn't build the whole church, and he built the drum, the dome, the thing on top, the lantern, and then the thing at the very top was built by Da Vinci and Verrocchio, the ornament. And in fact, a lot of Da Vinci's identity comes from the work of Brunelleschi, which I'll get into. Now, the thing about Brunelleschi is that he has an identity like Lynn. And he's always going against popular opinion. And the things that he does, nobody ever wants to believe him, but then once he does them, they work. So, he was a forecaster. And one example I wanted to pull out, because, most people probably remember when Lyndon LaRouche went to the Charlestown Naval Yard and they were building these structures, and he looked at these structures and saw that there were holes in the steel beam. And so you think, well, why would they do that? Why would they put holes? And he ended up getting in fights with his teacher about it, because she was trying to teach the kids that geometry is points and straight lines and perfect circles, and he knew, just being a boy playing in a naval yard, that that's not what science is. That's not what geometry is. It's actually something physical. And that shaped the way he thought. So I'm going to read this quote, but before I get to that, you guys see these holes, these windows in the drum, right?
The big ones?
Yeah, the big ones. People can probably see these guys. Now, they were originally not going to have them. They were just going to have it be a drum, because they were worried that if they had these windows, then they wouldn't be able to hold up this gigantic dome that they had no idea they were going to build. But Brunelleschi said, no, we have to have these holes in there because it'll make everything stronger. And everybody thought he was a lunatic. But since they didn't know anything, they didn't know any better, they listened to him, and the domes were there, and lo and behold. And it even got worse than that. When they were building it, there was a crack. There's this really big crack. And they're like, see, we told you these holes are a really bad idea. And he goes, no, the crack is supposed to be there too. So it just really reminded me of Lynn. So I wanted to share this thing Lynn said. And he said, fortunately, my fascination with the construction in progress at the Charlestown Navy Yard, in a suburb of Boston at the verge of my adolescence, armed me against Euclid's hoax. The classical modalities prevailed upon me on most accounts then. This was a part of a crucial point in the entire sweep of my life, from the time of early grades in a local grammar school onwards. The fact is that experience and my commitment to it saved my mind. This prevails in all categories of the educational and closely related considerations. I look back to the experience as having been the defense of my mind against the standard curricula. It is not what you appear to think, but the way in which you think it, which is ultimately decisive in crafting what you become. And so, I think Daniel will get more on the question of this pair, Cusa and Brunelleschi. I'm going to talk about Brunelleschi. But I will say, and it'll come out throughout the class and we can talk about it more later, these guys were very intimately connected. Because, you take the idea of Cusa, well, what did he define for people? He defined for people that this God that everyone had believed in, or thought they had believed in, was universal, that there was absolute truth in the universe. And that, in the context of, people, like when the plague happened, people thought, oh, God's angry. People did not have this idea of God, this ecumenical God, as absolute truth. And this is really crucial because when you know that there is an absolute truth, what then you also are led to understand by looking at unlearned ignorance is the fact that in that type of world, the physical manifestation of that world must be a world that is always changing. Because if you had any two things that were the same, or if you had this idea that things could become exactly the same, well, then they would become God. And you also have the phenomena that if you look at the universe, the mediation between that which could be and that which is has to be motion, has to be harmonies and proportions and things that aren't exact, but that share some relation to each other, because otherwise how could you actually mediate between God and man if you didn't have continual change? And so this is something, obviously, it's kind of hard to, it doesn't do it justice to explain it in a few sentences, and Daniel will talk about it more. And it is really worth looking at on learned ignorance and also on the vision of God, where he shows that not only is everything changing and a part of this absolute truth, but every individual, like a painting, God is like a painting that's always looking at you and always looking at everyone else, that this exists in everyone, even though everyone's different. And so this is something that Brunelleschi took up and demonstrated physically. That when you understand that the physical universe is always changing, you get this power. And that's why I put up this original quote from Toscanelli, because he said, Brunelleschi, and he knew Cusa, right? Toscanelli said that Brunelleschi was the most religious person that he knew, that he memorized all of Dante, all of St. Paul, all of these really crucial points of the Bible, and that talking to him was like St. Paul had come to life again. So this guy is a very, he's a real person, and as I'll get into, he didn't just build a dome. And he's actually a really hard person to talk about in, an hour and a half. So people can definitely share their thoughts and ask questions, but the question of Cusa, Daniel will definitely get into more, and I'm sure everyone is very excited to have him back. So I'm going to do this. So before I get to the dome, I want to show people the very last thing he did with his life, and then how he began his life, and then converge. And then when we have about 15 minutes left or 20 minutes left, somebody should tell me, because I want to show people bubbles and chains, so make sure we have time. So the last thing, this is the last building that Brunelleschi, he was born in the late 1300s and he died in the 1440s. And people have probably heard Lynn talking about his experience at the Pazzi Chapel, which is a little meeting house in in Florence. And it's where all the monks met, and they had a very hierarchical way of sitting when they had these meetings. But because, Brunelleschi, like Cusa, thought all men are equal, in a certain sense, he wanted to create a certain equality, so he created a space where he wanted the sound and the light of the space to be as uniform as possible. So that if you're singing or talking, no matter where someone else is in this chapel, they'll hear you in the same way.
What's the name of that chapel?
The Pazzi Chapel.
Spell it.
Pazzi, like pizza. Pizza, Pazzi. Okay. And this is, they're a family like the Medici. They financed this chapel. And I'll play for you.
And Brunelleschi goes there.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully the volume is... Okay. Okay. So,
Where is
the Pazzi Chapel's in Florence. It's attached to another church, not the Santa Maria del Fiore. And this is really cool. He worked on this with Della Robbia. You know the guy who made the... Yeah. They made... Who made... Sorry, not everyone does know this. Who made the... Who made the sculptures of these young children singing and playing instruments?
Those are the things on the chorus section in the dome itself.
Yeah, except they took it out and put it in a museum.
Right.
Yeah, but it's
Music manual.
yeah, in the music manual. If you have questions, Ashley, speak up. Feel free. But they're these very, I'll show you later, they're these very beautiful sculptures where you can tell that the people are actually singing. And actually, Brunelleschi, he was in this competition to build these bronze doors. And it was the, what's it called? When Isaac is killed by his father. And
Almost.
almost killed by his father. And the thing that is totally wild about Brunelleschi's version is the father is grabbing his son's neck in such a way to block the blood vessels so that he would feel less pain, to block the blood that was going to his neck before he stabbed him. So, anyways, that's just sort of an aside. I can show people that later. But, so he was working with this guy. They're both, they work together in this chapel. For the very first time, these, you see these, I think are they called terracotta, these things here? This was the first time they used a high-fired kiln to do ceramic. So they'd never done that before. So what I had started doing and looking at this, because I was thinking, wow, unified, because Brunelleschi, he was looking at, sight, sound, gravity. He was looking at all of these things that then later Kepler, when he shows that how the solar system is composed, he unites these two things. But I was really intrigued by this idea of the Pazzi Chapel, because I've been there and it's just really incredible. A lot of these things you have to experience, and you really have to use your imagination, because when you go into most buildings in the United States, they don't make you a better person. But what I actually found, which is really cool, is that these walls are in the ratio of the golden section. So they're in the same ratio as, this part of my finger is to this part of my hand, as this is to this, that basically the proportion that you get in your own body is what he used to construct this, or, petals with 5 flowers and these types of things. But he used the golden section and apparently that's what you do in acoustics, right? To create a uniform sound in like a recording studio, you actually use this golden proportion. However, light waves do not behave the same as sound waves. And he understood this. They actually did experiments at that time to know the speed of sound and stuff with different echoes and things like that. Light waves don't behave the same way. So for the light, to create the effect with the light, he had to use squares. And what you actually find when you play around with the geometry is that he was using 2 different geometries in this chapel. And the thing that when you read the experts, they say, well, we don't know what Brunelleschi was thinking because things don't fit perfectly. Like everything is like a little bit off. So there's something wrong with what he's doing. But, what does Lynn always say? It's the effect, right? And Kepler discovered the same thing about the solar system. So, and then I thought, well, that's cool because it reminds me of the Vitruvian Man. That, how Da Vinci shows these different proportions by putting man in the square and putting man in the circle. And he's able to find these proportions in the body, but even they don't fit perfectly together. Right? The centers are different, etc. So it's just, something that these guys were thinking through. So how did he, and then obviously what's implicit in all of this is that he understood gravity, because not only does it have this beauty and light and sound, the building also is still standing, and gravity is not a linear thing at all. So I'm going to skip that. There's a really beautiful dialogue in Italian that I started translating, except my translation is like really choppy. And it's basically a dialogue that Alberti wrote going through the dome, and it's called On the Tranquility of the Soul. And they say, well, if we're going to talk about the soul, we have to be in the place that creates the maximum space in which a soul can actually act like a soul to contemplate itself. So that was pretty fun. So what Lynn had told me is, when you're looking at Brunelleschi, you have to look at how he got started. He was a goldsmith. And I don't have time to go through the baptistry doors, but he was a goldsmith. His father was a lawyer, like Cusa, like a circuit lawyer. He worked for the city of Florence and the church and everything. And Brunelleschi spent a lot of time in his younger days in Rome. And he went to Rome, and there's this really fun quote I can show people later, but Brunelleschi went to Rome for about 20 years with the idea of actually studying, and they actually think, and I think, that Cusa's dialogue on weights and measures, the layman on weights and measures, it's based off of the work that Brunelleschi had done. Because in these 20 years with Donatello, he was able to measure these different Roman ruins. And, you know, Rome really was ruins. I mean, during the heart of the Roman Empire, there were 2 million people. And then I think during Brunelleschi's time, there was like 20,000 in Rome. So he and Donatello were measuring things. They figured out a method for looking at the weights of buildings. You know, just all this incredible stuff. And you know, he basically told this, there's this speech that he gave that was recorded by Toccola, who worked very closely with Da Vinci and wrote a whole book of machines and stuff. And Toccola records Brunelleschi saying, well, you have to be careful who you share your discoveries with, because they'll either like make you look like a fool or they'll steal them. And he knew very much that he was dealing with an oligarchy, and he was dealing with evil. I mean, they burnt Joan of Arc alive, right? The Venetians were not pretty people. Their effect on the church was not very church-like. And, you know, it wasn't like, because the Renaissance is when the fight broke out between man and the oligarchy. So it was not fun times. Most of what was done was beautiful, but it was also a war. And like our Schiller conference. And so Brunelleschi and Donatello were in Rome looking at all these ruins, the Pantheon, and basically told people they were looking for gold. And so everybody thought he was a goldsmith, right? I'm just looking for gold coins, and everyone's like, this guy is such an idiot. He hasn't found any, or he's found very few. And they started their relationship very early. This is a wood carving that Brunelleschi had done of Jesus Christ on the cross. And this is Donatello's. And if you look at these medieval carvings, they're very unhuman-like. But this is very human-like. He's holding himself up. You know, he looks like a man, right? Because this really was the filioque, right? You know, does Christ actually represent that man is God? Man is in the image of God. And so the reason that Brunelleschi did this one is Donatello, and there's like 10 different versions of the story. That's the other thing that made this research so difficult. Not only do you have an oligarchy, but you have Italians. Italians. And let me tell you, if you ever met my grandfather, they can tell a story. So basically, Donatello had done this wood carving in like 1412, 1413, so when they were relatively younger. And Brunelleschi was like, you made Christ look like a peasant. Like, this is Jesus Christ. You have to, like, you know, this guy is sublime. He got himself killed for, you know, anyways, you know, you have to make it look a little better. And supposedly, when Donatello saw Brunelleschi's Christ on the cross, he was so excited that he dropped a whole bunch of eggs that he had. And then Brunelleschi said, well, how are we going to eat dinner? And he's like, well, after seeing what you've done, I've totally lost my appetite. So they went to, so they were in Rome. They didn't find it, but they also found a lot of sculptures, like the Laocoon was found shortly after this. And Brunelleschi loved sculpture, and he looked at that. The other thing which he found was the proportions, the Ionic, the Doric, all of these different proportions that the Greeks had used in architecture and in music. And he found them by measuring these different buildings. What he also discovered is that nothing was straight. That to create the appearance of these proportions, things were tapered, they were curved, that they did actually have an understanding in the ancient time that nothing is actually straight. And so, Lynn had said, if you want to know how Brunelleschi made his discovery, you have to look at his work on optics. And I said, okay, well, do you mean optics or do you mean perspective? Because they're two different things. So after doing all of this work studying the ancients, Brunelleschi, he was an artist. And if you look at some paintings around this time, this is when perspective started, a vanishing point, really acknowledging the fact that there's an infinite. Around this time, you start seeing paintings where, well, let me put it this way. When you are a goldsmith, what do you make besides jewelry and watches and all of these things? Well, you make mirrors, right? So what Brunelleschi had discovered, and this is something that Da Vinci really got into even further, was not just how do you create laws in painting to represent the reality of nature, but how is it the human eye, which has a curvature, like they basically, in perspective, they say you have a vanishing point, right? What Brunelleschi and Da Vinci understood is that vanishing point is the human eye, and it's curved. And so again, this idea of man being at the center of the universe, that was primary in the way that he investigated light and art. And he was actually created this contraption, which is really cool, because he also understood when you walk away from something, the size of it doesn't diminish perfectly with how far away you are. It's actually inversely proportionate. So 2, 4, 16, you're moving the same amount of increments, but the thing gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So he created this contraption, and basically he's looking at the church, Santa Maria del Fiore. He's looking at the church. He figured out the perfect viewing angle in which to do this. And he basically painted the church on a piece of paper and then used silver for the sky. So it was like the church was painted on a mirror, so to speak, and you could see the sky. And then he put a mirror right here. I don't know if people can, there's a mirror right here, or this is the mirror, this is the picture, and he poked a little hole with like a cone coming out of it so you could look through it. And if you stood in the right place and held the mirror at a right angle, the perfect distance, you couldn't tell whether you were looking at the church or whether you were looking at his painting. And people were completely astounded.
It looked that real.
Yeah, it looked that real. Every account says you really couldn't tell. It looked totally real. Yeah. And, I even think that he and others who were painting at the time, not only did they use mirrors in these camera obscuras, but I think they also used lenses, like glasses. And it's funny because Kepler, in one of his works, he shows a contraption that's like a camera obscura. So instead of like poking this hole in this dark box and then seeing the image reflected upside down, because who wants to look at something upside down? That's like, it's not very beautiful. It just makes you sick to your stomach. But, which, it has its purpose. But Kepler actually shows this contraption that's like, now you would call it a camera. But it's sort of like a camera obscura, but instead of using mirrors or a hole, it uses lenses. And they never saw any, in Da Vinci's notebooks, anywhere, they never they've never seen this thing except Kepler made it. And I think that they had these, like they were playing around with these types of things like lenses and bending light. You know, they understood refraction and these types of things. And because you look at some of these Renaissance paintings and it really does look like you're looking through a lens or something. And anyways, it's just kind of fun because then, you know, a lot of people say, well, how could they have used, they didn't have concave lenses. That's what people say, like this couldn't have happened when I tried to look it up. But then Daniel started reading De Barillo, you know, Cusa's dialogue on the intellectual eyeglasses. They did actually have lenses. So that's just one of my theories. I think they didn't just use mirrors. I think they also used lenses. And that's how he was able to gain the knowledge that he has. I think a lot of these things, they were just destroyed. So, so that's something he was doing. He also, you know, so as the dome is being built, he started inventing new machines to build it. Like until Brunelleschi's time, most cranes were actually, and lifts were operated by human beings, like in a treadmill, hamster wheel thing. So they got pretty good exercise, but they were treated like animals, so that's like not very good. So Brunelleschi, of course, because he thinks of man as being divine, says, okay, well, we must use animals instead of human beings to move these, you know, these large bricks and everything like that. So he invents the first reversible gear. So you have like these animals that are going around these ox in a circle, and then they're lifting up the weight, and then instead of turning them around, you just slide this thing down, and then the gear turns the other way to move it down. He invented a crane, and all of these things, right, you have to actually understand gravity, because when you're moving something that's 2,000 pounds, when you're moving it up, it's not the same as moving it side to side. So these are the things that he was playing around with before he built this dome. So okay, then there's the dome. So how much time do I have left?
35 minutes.
35 minutes, okay. So I'll speak fast. And if people have questions, they can ask me, you know, either now or over the course of the next several days, because it's a lot to go through. So then there's the question of during the Dark Ages, a grouping of people, and Florence in and of itself is a very interesting story. Because this church, the Santa Maria del Fiore, was the very first church that was not funded by a king or a queen, or they probably didn't have queens back then, or a wealthy family, or the church. It was funded by the people of the city. In fact, at a certain point when you died, if you had a certain amount of money in your will, you had to leave a percentage of it to build this church. It was totally funded by the city. And around this time, they also started using something that Michael's been talking about, which is funded debt. That they actually started creating a whole new system of economics and accounting, nothing like what Hamilton had. But it's funny, if you want to do something that's never been done before, you can't do it under a monetary system, no matter what it is. It's just not possible. So anyways, they had decided, you know, they wanted to build the biggest dome that was ever built. And they had all these funny parameters that it had to be 144 something high because that's some sacred number in the Bible and blah, blah, blah. But nobody knew how they were going to build it. And a lot of artists painted it, and in every single painting, like in every imagination that the artist had of these of this dome, it had like buttresses, you know, things holding it together. It was not as beautiful as what Brunelleschi had actually created. So it had never been built before. Nothing like this had been done. We had just been in a dark age. And the largest dome that you did see was the Pantheon, which he studied in Rome. He actually like snuck onto the top and started removing pieces of it to really study it. it was, if people have seen it, you see a little dome poking out, but then the rest of the dome is enclosed by like 20-foot thick walls holding it together. So they didn't know how they were going to do this, and they had different ideas. And, Brunelleschi didn't really, he was probably thinking about it his whole life, how this dome was going to be built. And so just to give you a sense of his personality, this is his response to one of the initial discussions on how to build a dome that's never been built before. And it says, and everything was done by like councils. I think it was sort of like being Quaker. Like anytime you wanted to do something, like a whole group of people had to unanimously agree. So there was like an initial idea of like a republic, but it wasn't quite there yet. So he says to this opera, as it's called, he says, "Sirs, there is no doubt that in great undertakings you have always to encounter great difficulties, and in this one of yours there are greater than perhaps you imagine. For I do not think that even the ancients ever raised such a vaulted roof as this will be, and I, having considered it much, have never been able to come to any conclusion, the width as well as the height of the building dismaying me. But remembering that it is a temple consecrated to God and the Virgin, I believe that the wisdom and skill of any one who undertook it would not be allowed to fail. And if it were my affair, I would resolutely set myself to find a way. But if you resolve upon doing it, you must take counsel not alone of me, who am not sufficient to give counsel in such great a manner, but summon to Florence upon a fixed day within a year's time architects, not only Tuscan and Italian, but German and French, and those of every nation, and lay before them this matter, that having been discussed and decided by so many masters, it may be entrusted to him who has the best judgment and knows the best way." Now, I think he might have already had an idea, sort of like when Leibniz made his discoveries on the catenary. He started a whole competition to see if people could figure out certain problems with the catenary. So I think he, knowing the fact that people had to be raised out of the hell of an oligarchical culture, he really enticed people. Because I'll tell you something, I thought that the Dark Ages were like the Dark Ages. They had a hell of a lot of science going on in the Dark Ages, hundreds of treatises on light, all these different things. But none of it amounted to anything because they all believed in Aristotle, who Daniel will talk about when he gets up here. And all you can know is what you sense and blah, blah, blah. So they were doing all the science, but nothing came of it. Sort of like now we're making all these iPods and they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Or actually, they're getting bigger and thinner. So then there's the question of the dome, and there are some internet problems, so I wasn't able to put everything together that I wanted. I actually think we can turn this off. I think I'm done with this thing. Okay, so I have this. Now, here's the other thing. So how did he build this dome? Well, nobody has really come up with a solid idea that I'm happy with, including my own self. But I'll share with people what I have been provoked by. What I will also say is Alberti, who worked very closely with Brunelleschi, who wrote this dialogue on the tranquility of the soul, he wrote a book on architecture. And I was so excited because I thought, wow, he's going to, talk about how Brunelleschi built his dome. Nope. Didn't do it. Wouldn't do it. So people are I think there's a sort of fear, because there's very little that's recorded, there is a certain fear to actually make a hypothesis about what he did. So I have this book I can pass around. also. Now, the other thing is that the major picture they used to demonstrate how he built his dome was actually drawn by this guy DePrato, who, if you guys saw Jason's weekly report, wrote a very nasty sonnet about Brunelleschi. It was one of his enemies, and so this is like what they go by as his enemy. I mean, I will say this idea that the universe is always moving, everything is always moving, you know, the earth is moving, the planets are moving, the stars are moving. Well, this is also true for buildings. And those of you who live in an older house, I mean, you even hear it moving different weathers, right? You hear the wood move and everything. And so if, you know, one of the other things that LaRouche said is you've got to think about these funicular bridges. Like, have you guys ever been on a rope bridge? And I thought, well, that's an interesting idea, because I used to run on these rope bridges, and when you're running, they almost push you forward. I don't know if you guys have ever done that. Yeah, they push you forward because they want to be themselves, and you're like ruining their day, and so they're just like, get off of me. But it's really fun. It's just really fun. So I was thinking about that, and I thought that was pretty interesting. And I thought it was funny because I started thinking about certain things, and also Bill Ferguson had some fun ideas. But about this question of moving, because without going through a whole lot about architecture, if you're building a building like this building, and say Elliot wants to take a walk across the roof, is he going to be more comfortable when he's towards the walls or when he's in the middle?
I'd be comfortable towards the walls.
Why is that, Frank?
Feels safer. Unless you're not gonna fall.
You have something underneath you.
Yeah, you have something underneath you. Yeah.
You're closer to the edge.
Yeah, really.
Well, don't look down. The first rule in becoming a rock climbing champion, don't look down until you're at the top. And what they realized is there's a limit, because the further and further you move the walls away, the less and less stability you have at the center, right? There's nothing to hold it up. And so, you know, in architecture, especially in ancient Greece, they thought, okay, well, let's make a circle, right? But even a circle has its limits. So then they said, okay, well, let's take the radius of a circle, like say you have a circle, here's halfway, go a little bit more than halfway, rotate that up, and then you can have an arch that's even higher. You can have an even higher ceiling. So this is how they built arches. Now, the funny thing is, the circular arch is actually, because getting back to this idea of geometry, right? How Lyndon LaRouche knew that physical geometry was different than what you have on a piece of paper. So maybe we should move your computer, Elliot.
You won't get soap in it.
Okay, let's see here. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. This might be too... Because it's... How many people have played around with soap bubbles in their adult life? Ooh! Good thing we moved your computer. Let's see. If people have questions, they can ask. I'm just like a little bit frantic about the time, so.
I have a question, because there's these pictures where there's this question of negative curvature that was introduced, how And LaRouche talks about how this question with the dome is really touching on the very small. And
I
had
can't
read
get
an
this
article,
out.
A while back by Bruce Director where he talks about this question that the very small is largely characterized by negative curvature, whereas the very large, the astrophysical, is dominated by positive curvature. So do you know where this comes in terms of where this question of negative curvature was used in building the dome? I don't know if you've seen those pictures where the bricks are kind of stacked differently.
I think that is a good question, and I have thoughts about it. But I think that if we come back to it, it'll be better. But it's a good question.
We need a kid.
Oh
about a pen or pencil instead?
yeah, that's a good idea.
Scott?
Paperclip? Could you hook it?
Yeah, paperclip. But dude, well, I mean, there's one right here.
I need two.
Oh.
One isn't good enough, obviously.
How about a pair of scissors? Thank you.
He's getting pressed.
Thank God for the field organizers, or we'd be SOL.
Thank God for Ted Sanderson not getting through security.
Oh man.
Kind enough to say I could keep it. Thank you.
No coercion.
Okay, let's see.
It's a sharp
What's
idea.
happening?
Okay. Well, obviously everybody knows what a real bubble looks like.
Wow.
Oh crap. I don't think these are good enough to catch it, but let's see. Okay. So everybody knows what a real bubble looks like if you don't do anything to it. It's a circle, right? And part of the thing is that, the soap has a lot of tension. It's in a very tense situation. It's like this little film, and there's like gravity all over the place. So it tries to find the best shape to deal with that tension. And the best shape it finds is an almost sphere, right? A circle. So because the thing is that they're always like moving, right? The air is moving, the molecules are moving. So it makes itself into a circle. So what happens if you take two circles? What do people think will happen if you take two circles and you pull them apart to make the bubble? So instead of one circle, you use two circles. Ernie, what the hell is a catenoid?
Yeah.
Well, let me.
It'll make a cylinder.
Like an egg?
A cylinder.
Like say, so one of these circles makes a sphere, right? So say you have two circles and you pull them apart. So instead of blowing air through one of them, you pull out through two of them. What kind of shape do you think it'll make?
I think it would be a cylinder.
A cylinder?
All right. How about a parabola?
So what about, if we're dealing with gravity, right? If you drop something, then it falls, right? It doesn't go up. There's,
think it'll be saggy.
yeah, do you think it'll sag?
Down on the top and down on the bottom.
I think it'll say.
Yep.
I think it'll go up on the bottom.
Oh, yeah? Okay. So, let's see what it actually does. If it makes that shape, then we can all go home, because anything you can do in the whiteboard is you can do in the real world. And okay. Let's see here. I don't know if this is going to be big enough. Let's see here. Roger, do you think you'd be good at doing this? Who's good at doing these? I can't get it. You want to try, Roger? You're a kid at heart. Let's see if we can do it. I think it might be.
They have to be together and then you.
Yeah, and then pull.
Yeah, it just didn't last very long.
What did it look like?
Well, I'm trying to develop my
The problem is
my
it's
technique.
Why don't you
falling
hold up
out.
the cup?
Oh, that's a good
Why don't you
idea.
hold the, and then we might be able to see it. Hold up the cup.
I'm just trying to.
also bend the handle so that your hands have more strength? They're plastic. They're hard plastic.
I've never done it with anything this small. I had really
Yeah.
small ones in Leesburg.
Were they metal?
No, they were plastic. It worked with. See, what I did is I got them for $1.50 instead of $1. So when you pay $1.50.
I got it.
Thanks, Roger.
All right, I'll tell you what. You want to do the chain thing, and I'll.
Okay.
I may have a way to make some
Okay.
bigger loops.
Okay, so should I spill the beans or should I just leave it? Okay. Okay.
Go ahead, we'll see it.
Thanks, Roger. Okay, so, anyways, the thing that will happen, potentially, whatever it is, let me give you one hint. It's not the first one. It's not a cylinder. When you pull the circles apart, you don't get a cylinder. So that is an interesting thing, right? And it shows you that the universe, it is not linear. It's always changing. And if you expect it to be a certain way, like a good joke, it'll trick you. So with that being said, Brunelleschi, he was looking at weights and measures and things like that. And one of the things that he was playing around with, and I don't mean in a San Francisco kinky type of way, was so I need a volunteer. Ashley, do you want to help me with this? You will not be hurt. And just remember that the universe is always changing, but it's changing in a way that it's provoking you to want to know. Okay, so this is a hanging chain. And if you notice, I can move it around, but what does it want to do? It wants to take a very specific shape, right? Just like the bridge, just like running across the bridge. So I want to do 2 demonstrations to show you something about this chain. So what I want you to do is I want you to hold the chain. You're not mad at anyone right now, are you? Okay, just checking. I want you to hold the chain, and then I want you to spread your arms out like this and tell me what you notice. So just hold each end. Sorry if there's bubble all over it. Okay. Yeah. Do you notice any difference? Now bring it back. Does it feel heavier when it's like this or like that?
It feels heavier like this than when you spread it out.
So you're holding the same thing and it doesn't feel like it's the same weight. Okay. Does anyone else want to try it? You want to try, Justin?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it feels heavier like this.
You're not done yet, so stick around. Are you mad at anyone today?
No, I'm very happy right now.
Not even the not even the woman that called you an Uncle Tom in the field. Well, luckily she's not here. Okay. Okay, good.
Never mad at her.
Okay, so start off like this. That happened to him today, by the way.
Yeah, it did.
Although it probably happens every day. Okay, so hold it like this, and then slowly move your arms open and see if it gets heavier or lighter or what. No, okay, go ahead.
It seems like right here it feels pretty heavy, and then when I move it, it seems like the weight lightens up. But when it's stretched out more, it's about the same when it's like this. To me, that's how it is.
Okay. Now, try it one more time, but what you have to... Okay, now that I've said there's no such thing as straight, I want you to think straight. Open your arms, but make sure that they're moving in a straight line.
Okay.
So you can get...
I think it's more heavy like this.
Okay. But you notice that it changes, right?
Yeah, it does.
It changes.
Like
But
when it's in motion, it changes. The weight changes when it's in motion.
now, that's kind of funny, right? Because it's like you're holding the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now, we're going to try one more experiment. So I want you to hold this, and... Okay. Now, can you hold Justin, can you hold the bottom here?
Can you do it higher?
Oh, here, why don't you go behind us?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So hold the bottom, hang on, let's get this straight. And then hold the bottom.
Like this or?
Yeah. Right in the very middle. Okay. So now I'm going to take some of the chain away. Does it feel heavier or lighter?
Lighter.
Or the same? For her, it's... Here, let's make sure... Here, let's start again. Make sure it's in the very... Here. Cheers. Bye.
You could move over, back up a little, towards the computers. Yeah, to the left of the room. And Ashley, you gotta follow.
The whole game. That's one bit.
There you go.
Okay. Okay. So hold as close to the middle. Is everyone in agreement that Justin is holding it in the middle?
No, let it go, let it go.
Over again.
What?
Put both of you together again and let them see which is at the bottom.
Oh yeah, good idea. Grab the bottom. Okay. Good idea. You should run for Congress. Okay.
But he's not supposed to be lifting.
Ash-
this.
Yeah, don't lift it. Just hold it.
A
Yeah.
little bit lower than your side.
Okay.
Don't take any weight off of it.
Yeah, just hold the weight, but
Oh.
at the rest it in the palm of your hand.
Yeah, or
But try not to change the shape. Yeah. Okay. So Ashley, tell me if it feels heavier or lighter, or the same.
Lighter? I think it feels lighter.
You think it feels lighter? What about now?
It feels more lighter.
Okay. That's not how it's supposed to feel. Okay.
wow.
Excellent work. Excellent work. Has anyone done this before?
Yeah.
Yeah? Do you want to come up here? You can stick around though.
Okay.
Okay.
That doesn't mean you should say the answer based on what you already know. It's just based
Yeah, you should still say what you think. Okay. So hold the bottom. Okay. Okay, now does it feel the same or different?
It feels the same.
For her, for you.
The same or different?
Can I
Yeah.
ask you a question?
Yeah.
Why don't, without her hand there, do that and ask her how it feels?
you know, if there's not, because it seems like she may be holding, you know, I mean, does that make a difference?
Well, the idea is just because it's hard for me to take these links off and without it shifting.
Oh, without the
Yeah.
bottom changing.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of holding weight, it's just keeping the bottom at the same height.
Yeah.
Oh, like there you pulled it away.
Oh, yeah, you shouldn't want yours.
See, what you want is you want her shape to maintain its shape. You don't want the shape to change.
Let's see.
Keep the same number of links on her side.
Yeah. So,
So you just hold it until you get your right length on your side.
and then you can let go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So, okay. Cheers. Okay. So here, okay, feel how it feels. Okay.
Don't hold it up.
See, yeah, you're holding it up. You can
No,
see-
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not holding it up.
Just
It's just an optical illusion.
Just hold, okay. The thing that we don't want is for, here, let go for 1 second. We don't want the shape to change. So just hold like the link like this. Okay. So now I'm going to take this off. Okay, you can let go. Joel, you can let go. Does it feel heavier or lighter or the same?
Heavier.
Okay, let's try it again. Does it feel heavier or lighter or the same?
Lighter.
Okay.
Don't look. Don't look.
Heavier,
Feel it is missing, yeah.
lighter, or the same?
The same?
Okay. Now look at Bob.
Who's Bob?
Oh. Okay.
Shake his hand.
Okay, now don't look at me. Does it feel heavier, lighter, or the same?
The same.
Yay! I actually added to it. I tricked you. That's what I'm going to do next time. I'm going to make the person not look.
Yeah, blindfold them.
Yeah, blindfolds and chains. So when you're holding the same amount of weight, or what you think, you're holding the same thing and yet the weight feels different. And then you're holding the same thing and the weight feels the same as you're taking chain away. So that's sort of paradoxical, isn't it? Does that, at least, does the paradox gel with people? That if my arms are here and I move them apart, there's now more, I feel more pressure. Like if my eyes were closed, I'd feel like I'm holding something heavier with my arms like this than with my arms like this. But if my eyes were closed and I were holding this chain and someone were taking chain away like this, it still feels exactly the same. So this is something that someone like Brunelleschi, who made chains all the time because he was a goldsmith and made watches and these types of things, this is a phenomena he probably would have noticed. And it gets back to the idea with the bridge and with the dome. Because when you're building something like a roof or a dome, you're dealing with the fact that there is a lot of tension and a lot of compression, that everything you're building with has a tendency to want to pull out and push in. And in fact, Da Vinci says that arches, like what I was describing before, are the process of trying to unify two opposing forces. So, but what Brunelleschi understood is because no two things are the same, and this sort of comes up in the question of of fusion, right? Looking at certain orderings of fusion. What he realized is that if you try to create an equilibrium with these forces, you actually can't. And that's something like a sphere, like if you take a bubble, right, and you have a sphere, well, what's unique about a sphere? Maximum area for minimal surface, right? But it's also the case that because it's so quote-unquote perfect in the physical universe, if you do something to one part of it, you do something to the whole. It doesn't have an ability to move. Where if you look at the wonderful thing that we will soon demonstrate for you. Oh, it's ready. Okay, let's look at that.
Are you gonna? I don't actually know where the chain is in the dome. I'm probably not the only one, but I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, let's see. That is a really good question, Michelle, by the way. I was just saying because of time. Okay. All right, what do we got here?
Yeah. You need to. Okay. So we got two more or less circles, which by themselves just make a flat surface. Okay.
A circle.
Now. Yeah.
Did you just make those just now?
Roger is awesome. Let's hear it for Roger.
Wait till it works.
Well, now you.
Okay. Now
You should marry him.
when I first pull it out, you can see that the two circles meet and form a surface in the middle. So now what you got to do with the pencil is when I pull it up, stick the pencil through to pop that.
Okay.
Okay, and we'll see what happens.
Film be clear, so you can actually get a continuous surface.
Yeah. Okay. Poke right through it.
This?
Poke through it. Poke through it. Okay. Now.
Oh, it was there.
Okay.
Can you
Right?
angle yourself in this angle so we can see it too?
Use the tip, the pointed end of the
Oh,
perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a question. I don't know.
Judy.
Just do it quicker before the
You can erase that thing.
before the bubble. Okay.
Hey, Justin and Ashley, do you guys want to get closer? Can you see? Okay. Can I get closer?
Okay. Poke. Okay.
Oh, there it is.
Wow. It's the bottom of a donut. Why?
Bottom, the bottom of the donut.
Okay. Poke.
Inside of
The
a donut.
inside.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Work.
the inside. Yeah, there it is. Oh, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I get it.
Can people tell what shape it
Go
is?
closer to
All right.
Ashley. Are you seeing it?
So one thing that bubbles have is they have a lot of tension. Like the material.
It's also not the shortest distance between those two rims.
Well, that's why it's supposed to be a cylinder.
Right.
Okay.
Euclid's
You
getting
ready?
pretty upset.
Yeah.
Okay. Quick. Poke.
Quick.
Okay, Margaret.
Oh,
Can you
yeah.
see?
Oh, yeah.
I see.
Okay. Everybody see it?
Yes.
Do it
Okay.
a little more on this angle.
Okay. Now this is the next thing we're gonna do. We're gonna do it, and then somebody's gonna hold the chain in front of it to see if it's the same shape as the chain. I'm just kidding.
Get a mini chain.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Ready? Okay. Poke. Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's real cool.
Now the real question
That's
is,
the shortest distance between the two circles.
The size of a nuclear power plant, those things.
Yeah, it looks like the cooler. They have those.
Okay.
thank you.
Okay.
Roger Ham, everybody. His office hours will be posted on the door. So that's just a really fun thing, right, about the universe is it does that. Why wouldn't it take the shape of the cylinder, or why wouldn't it droop? So what you have with the catenary is you have, or with the soap, is you have a lot of tension right? Think about how easily you can pop a bubble. You know, it's like saran wrap takes a little bit more effort because the actual surface it wants to break apart. So it knows that that's what it wants to do. So not only does it do it, but it defies not only what Diane's saying, it doesn't make a cylinder, right? It doesn't take the shortest line path. It also goes up. It doesn't go down, right? It doesn't. So it's found a space in which to organize itself.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it the least amount of soap?
That you could possibly. Well, it would be the same amount of soap no matter what shape it made.
Oh, I don't think so.
You don't think so? Because if you have.
The least surface, is it
That's
the
the
least
least
surface?
surface of soap.
Yeah, surface area.
That.
Because if it went out, it would be more soap, and this way it uses less. And I'm wondering if it's the least.
I think it is. I think it is. I think that's why it's more stable.
No, your catenary thing, the hold the chain up is a good idea,
Yeah.
because it would still form.
Right. There's a.
Yeah.
I know they call these things minimal surfaces. Well, it would be at least for it to hold a cylinder shape, there'd be more action. There'd be like more tension, right? So the pattern is the least action surface, right?
Yeah, that's also a really good point. Like, if it's in motion as he's pulling it away, what would be the best way for it to pull in motion? And this gets at the idea of negative curvature, like this idea of the tractrix. Like if you have an object, and which is the evolute. I always mix up evolute and evolute, but it's generated from a catenary also. But if you have an object and you're pulling it as you're walking, the curve that it makes is not a circular curve. So that's also, that's a really good idea. But that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with the fact that a surface is in motion. And what you have with a dome, which is so difficult, is you have something called hoop stress. The fact that as you're building the dome, it wants to push out. Now, what you see when you play around with the catenary is that horizontally, the tension is uniform. Vertically, it's changing, but horizontally, the tension is uniform. So when you're using it to construct, there's something that guides it in such a way that it always takes its shape no matter what. That even though it's always changing, it always has its identity, right? Even though we as people are always changing, there's us. There's something about, Chris that's Chris.
I think everybody would agree.
And even if one day he says he's not going to wear a Bar Harbor t-shirt.
Should that day ever come.
It's because I have a Maine t-shirt on.
Yeah, right. Or Acadia National Forest. So,
So, like Michelle's question?
yeah, I know. I was actually just about to address that.
I bet you were.
Okay, so how did Brunelleschi build the dome? Well, I guess I can give the short answer, and then maybe tomorrow sometime, if people wanted to look at a few things, people who really want to know, I could show them. Because when I did this in Virginia, I took 2 hours to go through the history of Brunelleschi, and then 2 hours to go through how he built the dome. Now I'm trying to compress everything into an hour and a half. So if things are unclear, people can ask or we can talk about it, because I just have to figure out how to, how to make these things more concise. But, whoa, what's that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I took a movie in
She's watching TV.
These kids and their smartphones. So we're going to tell Richard the report back. I was eating during the class, and she was on her phone during the class. So, I mean, basically, the idea is that Brunelleschi came up with is this idea, which is very similar to the maximum in the minimum, or the fact that God is in man, is that as you're building something, you want that thing to be in each and every part as you're building it to when it becomes whole. So he knew the future. He knew what he was doing. And there's a few things. I mean, and if people have questions, they should ask. And I can also go through it more tomorrow. And things are unresolved completely in my mind, or things are still unresolved. Now, if you look at, I don't know if anyone's seen how you build an. Well, first of all, when you lay bricks in a dome, they have a tendency as you're laying the brick to hold themselves in place in all the bricks that came before it. And if you've ever seen an igloo being built, that's what happens. And they actually take, because, you know, usually when you build something that's big, you need a structure to hold it before it's done. But in building an igloo, they don't have such a structure because there's no, like, you know, sticks or anything. All there is snow. And so you use the ground to basically support your igloo, and you cut blocks of ice out of the ground that your igloo's in, and you spiral them up to the top. And so that each brick is, or slab of ice, is compressing the bricks that came before it. Now, you know, pushing down. Now, if, you know, most igloos, you only live in them for a couple days or a couple months. So something like that over time would just completely, you know, push down and push out. But it's a spiral. And actually what they found in some of these cases is that the actual shape of the igloo is a rotated catenary, because somehow they're able to generate a spiral. And actually you can buy these crazy tweeners who love their like REI gear, invented this kit. Rick Sanders showed it to me. It's a make your own igloo kit, because I guess what was happening is that people were going on these Arctic adventures and they were freezing to death from building their tent because the metal freezes. So they had this idea, and it's basically this block, and you attach it to a pole, and it has slits in it, and you rotate it around, and then you rotate it around, and each slit on this pole, it's non-uniform, like it's different lengths, and then by the time you're done, you have the shape of a rotated catenary to build an igloo. So the tweeners are good for things other than brewing beers.
Catenary goes this way, dome goes this way.
Well, here's the thing. I think that, because there's this whole idea, you know, when I brought up this idea of the pointed arch, and so a lot of people think that the dome is a pointed fifth, which means you take 4/5 of the arch and rotate it up. But if you actually look at pictures of other pointed fifth domes, they are not as beautiful as the Santa Maria del Fiore. So I don't think it's a pointed fifth. I think, and not like to say, the shape is a catenary or something like that, or the shape isn't a catenary, because the point is not. I think that the white pillars, the ribs, I think that those are catenary arches. And I found an Italian guy from the 1700s that defended Leibniz against Newton who agrees with me, who helped restore St. Peter's. But I think that these are catenaries, these arches. And you see catenary arches in nature, like there's this thing called the Rainbow Bridge in Utah, which is this rock formation. It's a rock bridge, and it's a catenary arch.
Oh, the St. Louis arch, that's an inverted catenary.
It's almost an inverted catenary because they changed the weight at the top. So it's a special. It is a catenary, but it's a special kind of catenary.
where you change the weight as you're building it up. But yeah, it is a catenary.
It's just an extra cool catenary. But yeah, you're right.
3 catenaries that meet in the...
Well, there's 8 ribs,
Oh, 8,
and I think
okay.
these are catenaries. Now, the other thing,
None of the books say they're catenaries?
no, just this guy from the 1700s who helped restore St. Peter's. And he was a lot like Brunelleschi. There is this crack in St. Peter's, and he did restoration work for other parts of St. Peter's. Or no, there's a crack in the Santa Maria del Fiore. And he was doing restorations for the Dome of St. Peter's, which was built very similarly, you know, in the Vatican. And so he helped fix the dome, and then he went to the Santa Maria del Fiore, and they said, there's these cracks. What are we going to do? Da, 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 da. And this guy said, look, these cracks are supposed to be there. And if you think that you're going to understand what Brunelleschi did with mathematics, you are just very wrong.
Well, isn't there also a story that there are small holes in the dome itself?
Yeah.
And during the Communist Party period at some time, they filled them with concrete because they thought that would strengthen
Yeah,
it.
those fucking communists,
And
man.
and that exacerbated the cracks because they were somehow like
Yeah.
expansion joints or something.
Yeah, and it totally just, they had to take the concrete out, yeah. And that's where Lynn got really involved in this. And he went there to defend the dome against the commies. And he said, hey, that's where I was converted, okay? That was my baptism. But so, yeah, right, you're right about that. The other thing in terms of laying the brick, Brunelleschi had built a dome. That's the other thing, this story that he had never built. How did this guy who never built a dome before in his life build the biggest dome ever? It's actually not true. He built other domes. And I don't know why they have that line in a lot of books you read. But one of them had this wooden contraption, and it followed the brickwork. It was like 1/12 of the size all the way up to guide it. So now Brunelleschi created all different shapes for his bricks and everything like that. He oversaw a lot of the brickwork and these types of things. And I think what he did is he had some kind of contraption where he was able to follow the brickwork, and it probably was some type of spiral. That's what I'm inclined to think, because he used this thing called a herringbone pattern, which, let's see.
That's in the inner, I got the book.
Oh,
That's in
thanks.
the inner, there's a double wall, right?
Yeah, there's two
That's
domes.
In the inner dome?
Yeah. And I also think he might have just put fake bricks in certain places to screw with people, but
Is the surface of the dome convex or slightly concave?
this part, yeah, it's slightly curves in.
It's slightly concave.
Yeah.
My mental picture was always somehow between the ribs, that if you hung a chain, that would define that sort of inward curve, the concave curvature of the dome. So it would actually be negatively curved if it's going that way and this way.
Yeah, that's what I was sort of thinking, is that instead of just having a simple thing like that, if you had, like, say you had your guiding post and you were moving it like on a track, right? So you were laying the bricks according to this track. That seems like the most realistic way to do it. And then you would, like you're saying, it would either curve in like this, which it doesn't, or it would curve out. Now, whether or not that was a spiral or there was some coordination, because some of the bricks he laid were horizontal and other bricks were vertical. And the horizontal bricks, they don't actually match each other. So you have bricks going this way and then bricks going this way. And then the bricks that are going this way are a little bit higher, but nothing actually matches. And then he also made all sorts of bricks, like with weird angles and stuff like that. So I do think that that's like what you're saying, that type of idea is possible. Or the other thing he could have done is kept moving the catenary up and then rotated something up. You know, like the inverse of what you're saying? And then rotated something up like that. So in terms of like the specifics of how he did it, I don't know. And I don't know if you could know. But you could know that you could know certain things. I mean, one thing is if you look at the Parthenon, not the Pantheon, but the Parthenon in Greece, every single brick or stone, every single stone is custom made. There's like thousands of them. And so whoever designed it, like literally every single thing in it was unique. So I think there's an aspect of that. And then I think that sort of gets at, you know, this question of negative curvature. But that's something I'm still thinking through.
Didn't he embed these hoop rings within the masonry? In other words, an octagonal figure is naturally not stable. It wants to break apart. And the walls, the thickness of the walls allows a circular hoop, to be embedded within the masonry.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because I'll say something about this, and then maybe I could say more to some, to people tomorrow. But when he designed the dome, he had said that he was going to use these chains, and he used stone and wooden chains. And basically, because you have this thing called hoop stress, like the tendency to want to push outwards, compress and push outwards with the circle. Like you can sort of see it here, that what he had intended to do is take these stone chains, because that's the other thing. He didn't choose the octagon. The octagon was chosen like 100 years before he was even alive. And I think he even made a comment that he wouldn't have chosen that, or maybe, anyways, but what he did is he took these chains, and in the original plan there were supposed to be 8 of them, but he took the chains and he wrapped them into the masonry work so that the masonry work would be held in place. However, what?
It's like rebar.
Yeah, and now you don't have to do stuff like that, because like then they had to use these things to wrap things, or they use like buttresses and these like arch type things to hold things together, because we have steel, and steel is light, and those supports are like within the steel itself, like when Lynn was at the Charlestown Naval Yard, but that wasn't always the case. So until Brunelleschi in this dome. But these chains were supposed to support it. Now here's the funny thing. He said he was going to use 8 chains. They've done all this infrared imaging. There's some pictures in that book of the dome, and they can't actually find more than 3 of them, which are at the bottom. So one, either they're there and they can't find them, or he just said he was going to use these chains so people wouldn't freak out. Or even he maybe realized, like, wow, this dome is a lot more stable than I thought it was going to be. Who knows? I mean, it's not like he obviously had an idea of the whole in his mind, but just like Kepler playing around with the solar system, I do think he was discovering things as he was, working. And now the other thing about it is the first third of the dome is built with a different material and in a different way than the second 2/3 of the dome. So that also plays a part. So, but I think, the most important thing is that he abandoned straight lines. He was committed to doing something that had never been done before. And he had the type of identity of someone like Lynn. And then what do you have? The Council of Florence, where they decide that, yes, we are going to agree that the filioque means that Jesus Christ is man in the image of God. That didn't happen in any other church. They had other councils. So you know, just this idea of real, you know, that's the essence of strategy. And that's, you know, when Lynn had his discussion on the educational program for this movement, and I brought up Brunelleschi, that's what he said. He said, you know, Brunelleschi is strategy. Look what I did with the SDI. You know, I know how to actually win a war, how to take these guys down. And if you look at someone like Cusa, who, you know, I think there was a time in the 1430s that I can pretty much say that Cusa, Tuscanelli, and Brunelleschi, you know, hung out. Whether or not that's true, you know, that's what Cusa was committed to, was destroying this empire. And I think that they had a very good collaboration around it. And you know, essentially, that's why this educational program for the young people is so important, because there is nothing from our lives experience that can generate the solution. Some of the older people in this organization, in Lynn, they do have that. And so I think that's why the educational program is so important. And he made it while Keisha was waging a campaign, you know. So, yeah, that's what I could say for now. And if people want me to more like draw out and model and show them how Brunelleschi, like actually, how I think he actually built it, then I'd be happy to show people that like tomorrow or something. But I guess I can leave it there, since we've got to talk about how we're going to raise a bunch of money next week. And if people have quick questions, they can ask them.
Will you be here for a few more days?
I'm leaving on Tuesday. California needs some more sunshine.
Thank you.
Thank you.